I don't sleep much anymore. Haven't for a long time. I get up around 2, sometimes 3, and I just sit here. Pull the robe around me. Let the house be quiet. There's a kind of peace in it now that I didn't used to understand. All that quiet. When I was young, I hated silence. Silence meant something was wrong. Silence meant somebody was angry, or somebody had given up, or something was being decided in another room without you. But now I understand that silence is just time. It's just the world breathing. And I've gotten used to sitting inside it without needing it to be anything else. My name is Clarence Edwin Dupree. I'll be 78 years old in April if April decides to have me. I've been sitting in this chair for about 40 minutes now, maybe more, watching the way the streetlight comes through the curtain and makes that same crooked line on the floor it always makes. My coffee went cold. I didn't notice when. That happens to me now. Things go cold while I'm somewhere else in my head. I want to tell you something. I don't know if I've ever told it to anyone the full way through. Pieces of it maybe. My daughter Renee, she knows some of it. My son Marcus knows less than he thinks he does. There's a version of this story that I've let people believe for a long time because it was easier than the real one. And I think I'm old enough now that easy doesn't matter much to me anymore. It started with a holiday, a Thursday in November, Thanksgiving Day, 1987. But it didn't start there really. It never starts where you think it starts. I was 40 years old in 1987. I had my own garage by then, had it for 6 years. Just a small thing. 2 bays, me and a part-time kid named Deshaun who was good with his hands and bad with his time. We worked on everything. American cars mostly, domestics, the kind of work that gets into you, into your clothes, under your nails, into the creases of your knuckles, no matter how much you scrub. Motor oil has a smell that doesn't leave. People who've never worked with their hands don't know that. They think you can just wash it off like you wash off paint or dirt. But grease lives in your skin after a while. It lives in your hair. It gets into the fabric of everything you own. My garage shirts, my garage pants, even my good coat had a faint trace of it if you stood close enough. I knew that. I'd known it for years. I never thought of it as shameful. I'm trying to be precise about what I knew and didn't know, because that matters when you're confessing something. You have to be honest about what you were seeing clearly and what you were choosing not to see. My wife at the time was a woman named Gloria Annette Dupree, née Holloway. She was 37. She was a beautiful woman. I mean that with no bitterness in it at all. She was genuinely beautiful, thin-boned and precise, with a way of carrying herself that made rooms feel like they needed to adjust. Her mother was a woman who ironed everything. I mean everything. The woman ironed her dish towels. And Gloria had grown up in that house with that kind of standard, and she had carried it forward into her own life with real conviction. Her stepfather was a man named Preston Holloway. He had money, not extraordinary money, but solid money, the kind that comes from decades of owning a small insurance company in a city where black families are buying homes and needing protection on them. He had a brick house in a neighborhood that still felt like something. 2 cars in the driveway, a dining room table that seated 12. And he had opinions about things, about people, about what kind of man was worth something and what kind wasn't. Preston Holloway never liked me. I knew this from the first Thanksgiving I ever attended at that house, which was 1979, 2 years before Gloria and I got married. He shook my hand and asked me what I did, and when I told him I worked in a garage, he nodded the way people nod when they're deciding something about you. Not angry, just deciding. And I could feel it. You always feel it. When a man looks at you and the look means you've already been measured and found to fall short. I felt it, but I didn't say anything. I was 32 years old, and I was in love with his stepdaughter, and I wasn't going to make a problem on a holiday in a man's own house. That was probably my first mistake, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For years I went to that house, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas that we could manage. Gloria's mother, whose name was Evelyn, was a warm woman who made too much food and hugged you twice when you came through the door. She liked me, I think. Or she liked that I made Gloria happy, which is a kind of liking. But Preston was always there, at the head of that table, with his crisp shirt and his bourbon and his way of steering conversation toward things I couldn't contribute to. Stock markets, golf, handicaps, other men's career trajectories. I wasn't stupid. I ran a business. I could talk about money. But I never felt like my kind of money counted in that room. And Gloria. I have to be careful here, because I loved her. I want to say that clearly, before I say anything else about her. I loved Gloria Dupree with a completeness that I don't think I've ever fully articulated to another living person. I loved the way she laughed when something actually surprised her, a real laugh that she couldn't control. I loved how she made lists for everything, and then lost the lists. I loved that she cried at commercials, but never cried when she was actually sad, just got very quiet and organizational. I loved her. And the thing about loving someone is that it makes it harder to see them clearly. It makes certain truths harder to hold. You want to believe the best version. You keep choosing the best version because the other one hurts too much. The other version was that Gloria had always been a little ashamed of me, not of me as a person. I don't think it was that simple or that cruel, but of what I represented, of where I placed her in the world relative to where she wanted to be. She worked as an office manager at a dental practice. She dressed well. She had a particular life she was building toward, and I was a mechanic, and mechanics aren't the men you see in the stories of that particular life. I don't know when I first understood this about her. I think I understood it early and just kept filing it away somewhere I didn't have to look at it. So, November 1987. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and we were in the kitchen. I had come home from the garage later than I meant to. Some fool had brought in a '79 Buick with a transmission issue that turned into 3 transmission issues, and I was in it until nearly 7. I came home with the grease on me and the smell of it, and I was tired, the way you're tired when you've been under a car most of the day. My back was telling me about it. My hands were dark at the creases in a way that wouldn't come fully clean until the morning. Gloria was at the counter looking at something, a notebook. She had this small spiral notebook she used for planning things. She looked up when I came in, and something crossed her face. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was. Not disgust, but something adjacent to it, or something that preceded it, like a door that was almost closed but not quite. I went to the refrigerator, got some water, said something about the Buick. I don't remember exactly what. Something to fill the air. And then she said it. She said the words that I have been carrying for 36 years. She said that her mother had called, that the family was gathering at Preston's house on Thursday, like always, that her sister Lorraine would be there, and Lorraine's husband Gerald, who was a dentist, and Preston's brother's family, who I'd met twice, and some neighbours who came every year. And then she paused in that particular way she had, that organisational pause. And she said that she thought it might be better if I didn't come this year. I had the water glass in my hand. I remember that. I said, "Better how?" She didn't look up from the notebook right away. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said it. She said nobody wants to sit next to a man who smells like a grease shop all through dinner. She said it plainly, not cruelly. That was the thing. She said it the way she might say the weather was going to be bad or the turkey needed another hour, like it was just a fact she was reporting. Nobody wants to sit next to a man who smells like a grease shop all through dinner. As if this were a reality we had simply agreed on. As if I had known it all along. I didn't say anything for a moment. I said, "I get it. That's all." I said, "I get it." And I put the water glass down on the counter, and I went into the bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a little while. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. I sat there, and I listened to her turning pages in the kitchen, and I thought about a lot of things, very quickly, the way a mind does when it's trying to process something that doesn't have a clean shape to it. I thought about the Buick. I thought about Deshawn, who I needed to call about the schedule. I thought about my father, who had been a mechanic too, and who had died at 62 with hands like tree bark and more dignity in one afternoon than Preston Holloway had in his entire house. I thought about the year I opened the garage, how proud I was, how I had walked Gloria through the empty bays before we got the equipment in and told her, "This is mine, I built this," and she had smiled the smile that meant she was trying. I thought about all the Thanksgivings I had sat at Preston Holloway's table and felt like something that had been tracked in on someone's shoe. And then I got up. I went to the closet and I took out my good suit, the dark grey one, the one I wore to church on the big Sundays and to funerals and to Marcus's graduation from middle school, because I hadn't had money for a new one before the high school one. I laid it out on the bed. I got my good shirt, the white one with the faint blue stripe. I got my tie, the burgundy one that Gloria had given me for our anniversary 2 years before. I got my good shoes and the polish, and I polished those shoes right there in the bedroom, sitting on the floor, until they held a reflection. I showered, I scrubbed, I used the brush on my nails until the last of the grease came out of the creases. I shaved, I put on the suit, I tied the tie carefully in the bathroom mirror. Then I went back to the kitchen. Gloria was still at the counter. She looked up and her face changed in a way I will never forget. She looked at me in my suit at 7:30 on a Wednesday night in our kitchen, and she couldn't find the right expression for it. She tried a few of them. She settled on something that was trying to be irritated but kept sliding toward something else. She said, "Clarence, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to your mother's tomorrow. I'm going to sit at that table, and I'm going to smell like a clean man in a clean suit, which is what I am. And if Preston doesn't want me there, Preston can say so himself." She looked at me for a long time, and then she said, very quietly, "You're going to embarrass me." And I said, "Gloria, I have been embarrassing you for 8 years without knowing it. At least this time, I'm doing it on my feet." I went to bed. I don't know if I slept. I don't remember sleeping. The next morning, she was already dressed when I got up. She was efficient and brisk in the way she got when she was angry, but had decided not to have the argument. I put on my suit. She drove. We didn't talk in the car, except when she told me to take the exit. We walked into Preston's house and I am here to tell you that I was clean and I was pressed and I smelled like the soap I'd bought because it was the nicest soap we had in the house. And I carried myself the way my father had taught me to carry myself in rooms where someone was hoping you'd make yourself small. You keep your back straight. You look people in the eye. You don't apologize for existing. Evelyn hugged me twice, like always. Preston shook my hand and looked at me the way he always looked at me. Gerald the dentist said hello and went back to talking about whatever he'd been talking about. The neighbors, whose names I never fully remembered, said hello. Lorraine, Gloria's sister, looked between me and Gloria with the careful eyes of a woman who understood that something had shifted. We sat at the table. I sat next to Gloria. I was clean. I was quiet. I ate Evelyn's food, which was extraordinary, and I complimented her on it specifically and genuinely, because it was. Nobody said a word about Greece. Nobody said a word about garages. I drove home. Gloria and I didn't speak much that night. And here is where the confession really begins. Because what I did at that Thanksgiving was not the end of anything. It felt like it might be, at the time. It felt like a kind of confrontation, a kind of line drawn. But lines drawn in silence aren't lines. They're just places where you stand alone. I never told Gloria how much those words had hurt me. I never said to her, when you said nobody wants to sit next to a man like me, you weren't just talking about the smell. I never said, I heard what you actually meant. I never said, I have felt that particular look from you for years, and I have been telling myself it was something else because I needed it to be something else. And now I can't tell myself that anymore, and I don't know what we do with it. I never said any of that. I got dressed, I showed up, I made my quiet point, and then I came home and I put the suit back on its hanger. And I went back to work on Friday morning because somebody needed their car by the weekend, and the silence between Gloria and me just became the air we breathed. We were good at that, both of us. We had grown up in houses where silence was the language adults used when they'd run out of other options. We were fluent in it. Marcus was 12 in 1987. Renee was 9. They were in that house with us, and they felt the weather of us the way children always do. Children don't need to hear words to know what a house is holding. They read it in the pace of footsteps, in the temperature of dinner time, in whether their parents touch each other when they pass in the hallway. Marcus got quieter that winter, started spending more time at his friend's house. Renee got louder, the way some children do when they're trying to fill up something they can't name. I worked. That's what I did, with everything I didn't know how to say. I went to the garage early and came home late, and I poured the feeling of it into the work, into the engine, into the problem I could actually solve. That has been the pattern of my life. When I couldn't fix something that mattered, I found something I could fix, and I fixed it until I was too tired to feel the other thing. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I had talked to her that Wednesday night in the kitchen. If instead of sitting on the bed in the dark and then getting dressed in silence, I had said, Gloria, come here. Sit down. I need you to understand what you just said to me. I wonder if it would have changed anything. I wonder if she even knew the full weight of what she'd said. Some things people say without understanding that they're saying the truest thing about how they feel, the thing they've been not saying for years. And then they're surprised when it lands, like it lands. I have to be fair to her about that. I have to be honest that I don't know whether she understood. When those words came out of her, that Thanksgiving, I say lasted like it, that Thanksgiving. I say lasted like it was enduring something, and I suppose it was, though it didn't always feel that way. There were good years folded into those years, or good moments inside the bad ones. There were nights we laughed. There were times the children did something that pulled us back together the way children can, purely by being themselves, purely by being alive and funny and surprising. There were nights I reached for her in the dark, and she turned toward me, and for a little while the silence was warm instead of cold. But something had been named. Even without being spoken, it had been named. And named things don't go back to being unnamed just because you pretend not to see them. I used to drive sometimes, late at night, just to drive. I'd take a car I was working on if it needed a longer test run, or I'd take my own truck and I'd go out on the highway and just drive. Not toward anything, just moving. I'd think about my father on those drives. He had died in 1983, 4 years before the Thanksgiving. Lung cancer. He'd never smoked, but he'd been breathing bad air in garages for 40 years, and eventually the body tallies it up. He died at 62 with those tree bark hands, and that same kind of dignity I was trying to hold on to. My father never talked much. He was a man of gestures. When I was small, before I understood the language of it, I used to think his silence meant he didn't care. I thought he was just quiet, because nothing was reaching him. But watching him die, being in that room with him at the end, I understood that his silence had been full the whole time. He just hadn't been given the tools to empty it. The men of his generation, the men who came up the way he came up, they'd been taught that the feelings inside them were cargo to be carried, not words to be spoken, and they carried it until the cargo crushed them. I am my father's son, in ways I couldn't see while I was busy being them. The divorce came in 1991. It was civil, meaning nobody screamed, nobody threw things. Gloria was very organized about it. She had already found an apartment. She had already looked into schools. She was efficient in her grief, or whatever it was she was feeling, in the same way she was efficient in everything. She sat down with me at the kitchen table, the same table where 4 years earlier she had said what she'd said about the grease, and she laid out what she thought made sense. I sat there, and I thought, this is who she is. She makes lists. She organizes. Even the ending of this, she is organizing. I signed the papers. I moved into a place on Garfield Street, a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner. The smell of the dry cleaner in the mornings was particular, chemical and hot. I used to lie in bed before my alarm and think about how this was now my smell. Not grease, perchloroethylene, and steam. The children stayed with Gloria during the week and came to me on weekends. That first year of weekends, I learned how to be a different kind of father than I'd been. During the marriage, I had been the working father, the man who came home tired and ate and fell asleep in his chair and was present in the technical sense. On weekends, I had to be the whole thing. I had to be the presence. Marcus was 16 by then, already pulling away the way teenage boys do, already testing whether he needed you or not. Renee was 12, still in that age where she'd let me hug her, but only on her terms. I took them to the garage sometimes on Saturday mornings, showed them things. Marcus was actually good with a wrench, had a feel for mechanical things that surprised me. Renee was not interested in engines, but she was interested in the business side of it. the invoices and the accounts, and she'd sometimes sit at my desk and organize my papers with a seriousness that reminded me painfully of her mother. There's a Saturday I think about more than any other from those years. Marcus was about 17. Renee was 13. We were at the garage, and I was under an old Cadillac, and Marcus was handing me tools when he asked me something. He asked me, "Dad, why'd you and Mom really split?" I came out from under the car. I sat up. I looked at my son, who had Gloria's eyes and my father's hands, and I thought about what to say. I said, sometimes two people just stop fitting together the way they used to. He looked at me, like he was deciding whether to accept that answer or push on it. He pushed a little. He said, "Was it because of work? Because you were always at the garage?" And I said, "That was part of it." I didn't tell him about the Thanksgiving. I didn't tell him about what his mother had said to me, or what I had felt, or what I had done with what I felt. I gave him the easy answer, the partial truth, the organized version. I gave him the same kind of answer I had come to resent in my own father. I have thought about that conversation a lot over the years, more than Marcus probably knows. I've thought about how different things might have been if I had told him the full thing. Not to hurt Gloria, not to make her the villain, but just to say to my son, here is a thing that happened to me. Here is a wound that I couldn't figure out how to heal. Here is the part of myself that I am still trying to understand. Instead, I gave him the cleaned-up version, the version that didn't smell like anything. Marcus grew up to be an engineer, not a mechanic, a civil engineer. He builds bridges and retaining walls and whatever else it is that civil engineers build. He lives in Atlanta now with his wife and 2 boys, my grandsons, who are 6 and 9, and who I see at Christmas and in the summer, when I can make the trip. He is a good man. He's not a tender man, in the way some people are tender. He carries things the same way his grandfather carried them, silently forward. But he's good. He called me on my birthday last year, talked to me for 45 minutes, told me about the boys, and about a project he was working on, and about a trip he was planning. And at the end, he said, "I love you, Dad." And I said it back, and I meant it. But there are things I never told him. There are things I never told either of my children that I wish now I had made more of an effort to say. Renee came to me some years later. She was in her late 20s, maybe 30, and she said she'd been thinking about the divorce. She was in therapy at the time, which is something I didn't understand then the way I understand it now. She said her therapist had asked her what she thought the real reason was for our marriage ending, and she'd said she didn't know. She was asking me. She was asking with the same seriousness she'd used to organize my invoices at 13. I was more ready for it by then. I was in my late 50s. I told her more than I'd told Marcus. I told her about the Greece comment. I told her what her mother had said and what I had understood from it. Renee was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Mom didn't mean it the way it landed." And I said, "Maybe not, but she meant something by it, and what she meant was real, and I never asked her about it, and that was my part." Renee looked at me like I'd given her something she hadn't expected. She said, "That's the most honest thing you've ever told me." I didn't know whether to feel proud of that or ashamed of it. I've thought about what Gloria actually meant, on and off, for 36 years. I've turned it over the way you turn something over in a tumbler, the way stones get smooth by being moved against each other constantly. In the beginning, I understood it as pure rejection, as shame, her shame of me. And some of it was that. I'm not going to revise that away. She was ashamed of what I was, or ashamed of what I represented in a room she needed to feel good in. That was real. But somewhere in my 50s, I started to wonder if there was also fear in it. Fear that Preston would say something. Fear that I would respond the way she'd seen me respond once or twice over the years when someone was disrespectful, quietly and absolutely, the kind of response that doesn't give the other person anywhere to go. Fear that the dinner would become a confrontation, and the confrontation would be about her choice of husband, about what she had and hadn't done with the life her stepfather had given her every advantage to build. That's a different thing from pure cruelty. That's someone protecting themselves in a direction that happens to cut you. I'm not saying it excuses it. I'm just saying that when I stopped needing it to be simple, it stopped being simple. I never talked to Gloria about any of this. We maintained a kind of cordial non-relationship after the divorce, the kind that's necessary when you have children together. We were at Marcus's high school graduation together, at Renee's wedding together, at the births of Marcus's boys. We were civil and organized and careful. We asked after each other's health. We passed our grandchildren between us at holidays with genuine affection, the love of grandparents being a more portable love than the love of spouses. Gloria remarried in 1998, a man named Desmond, who was a retired school principal. I met him a few times at family events. He was a fine man, wore nice things, didn't smell like anything in particular. She seemed happy with him, or something close to happy, which I decided to be glad about. I decided to be glad because the alternative was to spend energy on something that had been settled for years. She died in 2014. I'm going to say that again, because I still feel the weight of it, even after all this time. Gloria died in 2014. Was her heart. She was 64 years old. I was at my apartment watching something on television when Renee called me, and I remember the sound of the phone in the quiet, and then Renee's voice saying, "Dad." Just that one word, and the way she said it told me what was coming before she said the rest. I sat down very slowly on the couch. I don't know how to explain what I felt. It wasn't grief the way you'd expect, or not only that. It was something more complicated and less clean than simple grief. It was the feeling of a door closing that you didn't realize you'd been keeping slightly open. Some part of me, some part I hadn't fully admitted to myself, had been holding on to the possibility that someday we would have the conversation, the real one, the one where I told her what the grease comment had done to me, and she told me what she'd actually meant by it, and we sat in the truth of it together, just the two of us, without organizing anything or protecting anyone, without being parents in front of our children or ex-spouses in front of our families, just two people who had loved each other sitting in the honest version of what had happened. I never got that. She died, and I never got it, and that is a specific kind of grief that doesn't have a clean name. Desmond was gracious at the funeral. He seemed like a man who had truly loved her. I was glad of that too. In the complicated way, I was glad of most things having to do with Gloria by then. I stood at her casket for a long time. I thought about the Wednesday night in the kitchen. I thought about her at the counter with her notebook. I thought about her face when I came out in the suit. I thought about her voice, not the voice she used when she was being careful, but her real voice, the one that came out when she was relaxed, when we were somewhere just the two of us, and she forgot to be composed. She had a beautiful voice, low and slightly husky, and she used to hum when she was cooking. Nothing in particular, just sounds that weren't quite songs. I used to stand in the doorway and listen before she knew I was there. I miss that. I have missed it for a long time. I drove home from the funeral alone. I've thought a lot about what the garage was to me. I want to be clear about this because I think it's part of the story, even if it doesn't seem like it at first. The garage was the thing I built, the thing I chose for myself when I was young enough to believe that what you built with your hands was the truest measure of you. My father believed that. His father before him believed it. We were men who understood worth through physical creation, through making things work that had stopped working, through being the person someone called when the machinery of their life failed. That feels like dignity to me still. That has never stopped feeling like dignity. But dignity and respect aren't always the same room. You can be a dignified man in a room full of people who don't respect what that dignity is built on. I've been in that room many times. Preston Holloway's dining room was one version of it. There were other versions. The bank, when I applied for a business loan, twice before I got it. The neighborhood association meetings in the late 80s, when the neighborhood was changing and certain homeowners had opinions about what kinds of businesses should be on which blocks. The school parents' meetings when Marcus was getting into trouble for a while at 14, that particular year. And I could feel the way some of the other parents looked at me, at my hands, at what my hands told them about who I was. I'm not saying this to make it into something larger than it was. I'm not saying the Grease comment was only about race or only about class. It was a wife talking to a husband. It was personal. It was intimate and specific, but it was also held inside a world with a particular shape, and that shape had been shaping me for 40 years by the time she said it. I sold the garage in 2003. My knees and my back were telling me that the work under the cars was becoming something they couldn't sustain anymore. And Deshaun, who had been with me full-time for 15 years by then, wanted to buy me out. He had a family and a mortgage, and he needed the ownership to make the numbers work. I sold it to him for less than it was worth, and I don't regret that. He kept the name. Dupree's Auto. It's still there. I drove by it a few years ago on my way to the hardware store. Same sign, little faded. It made me feel something I didn't fully understand. I worked for a few years after that in the parts supply side of things. Nothing heavy, just the knowledge of it. Retired properly at 70. I have my Social Security, and I have the money from the garage, and I have this apartment which I've been in for 20 years, and which is modest and sufficient, and mine in the way that things are yours when you've earned them, slowly. My hands look like my father's now. I look at them in this light sometimes, and I see him. The knuckles, the particular texture of the skin across the back of them. When I was young, I was afraid of becoming my father. Not because he wasn't a good man, but because I could see the shape of the life his goodness was trapped inside of, and I wanted something bigger, or at least different. I wanted the life to have more room. I wanted the silence to mean something other than endurance. I don't know if I built that bigger life or not. I think I built a different one. I think different was what I managed. Marcus called me last spring, and he was talking about the boys, about his older son, who is 9 now, and who has started asking questions about family the way 9-year-olds do, asking where does our family come from, what did great-grandpa do, what's the history, And Marcus said, "Dad, I don't know how to tell him the story. I don't know the whole story." And I was quiet, on the phone for a moment. I thought about the conversation in the garage, the one where I gave him the half answer. I thought about all the half answers I'd given both my children about who I was and what had shaped me, and where the grief had come from, and what I had done and not done with it. I told Marcus I'd write some things down for him. I told him I'd put it in a letter. I haven't written the letter yet. That's part of why I'm up at 3 in the morning, telling this to the quiet, I suppose, because the letter has been sitting in me, needing to be let out, and I've been finding reasons not to sit down and write it. But here is the thing about that Thanksgiving, the thing I've circled around for 36 years and still haven't found the center of. I don't know if I was brave or just proud. I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. When I got up and put on that suit and showed up at Preston Holloway's table, was I standing up for my own dignity? Or was I refusing to be wounded in a way that might have actually opened something up between Gloria and me? If I had stayed home that Thanksgiving, if I had sat in the quiet of our house while the children were at their grandmother's with her, if I had let myself feel the full weight of what she'd said, maybe I would have been ready to say something real when she came home. Maybe the being left behind would have been the thing that finally cracked me open enough to speak. Instead, I got dressed, I performed dignity, I showed up, and I came home, and I said nothing. That's the part that follows me, not the insult. The insult was her failure, and it was real. But people fail each other. That's part of the contract of being close to someone. You will eventually fail each other in ways that reveal what you actually believe. The insult was hers, but the silence after it was mine. The 4 years of carrying it without setting it down between us, that was mine. The divorce that came out of something we never managed to name directly and address directly, that was mine as much as hers. I have a friend named Raymond, who I've known since we were young men. He's had his own marriage, his own grief, his own catalogue of things done and undone. We used to talk at a diner on Saturdays before his knees made the booth too uncomfortable for him to manage. He told me once that the thing he most regretted in his first marriage was not the fight they'd had, the big one that ended it, but the 22 smaller fights they'd had before it that he'd let dissolve without resolution, without any real understanding reached. He said he and his wife had gotten very good at the ceasefire and very bad at the peace. I understood that when he said it. I understood it in my whole body. Gloria and I were good at the ceasefire. We were excellent at it. We could move from conflict to function within hours. We never stayed in the fire long enough to burn down to the truth of it. And the truths accumulated unfired, just sitting there, in the walls of the house, in the air of the kitchen, in the silence of the late nights, until the house was full of them, and there was no room left for anything else. I think about the children growing up in that. I think about Marcus getting quieter that winter of 1987 and spending more time away. I think about Renee getting louder, filling things up with sound. I think about what they were reading in the air of us without either of them having the words for what they were reading. And I wonder what they carried into their own lives from it, what they're still carrying. Renee is fine now, I think. She's 45. She has a daughter named Amara, who is 13, which means she has a teenager, which I told her is justice. She and her husband have a good life. She calls me every Sunday. She's the one who takes me to the doctor when I need it, who makes sure I'm eating properly, who asks the specific questions that mean she's been thinking about me during the week. She got that from her mother, that organizational caring, the love that shows itself in logistics. I have come to understand it as fully love, even if it took me a long time. Marcus, I worry about sometimes. In the quiet way you worry about the child who reminds you of yourself. He keeps things inside. He moves forward. He solves problems. He calls on birthdays and talks for 45 minutes and says, "I love you" at the end, and then goes back to his life. I wonder what's in the walls of his house. I wonder what his boys are reading in the air of him that they don't have the words for yet. I should write that letter. I should tell him about the Thanksgiving, about what his mother said and what it meant and what I did with it. Not to give him Gloria as a villain, because she wasn't one, but to show him the shape of the mistake I made, the particular shape of carrying something rather than setting it down, so he can recognize it if he starts doing it himself, so he can know it's a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe what he needs isn't my story. Maybe what he needs is to be asked about his own. Maybe the letter I should write is the one that says, "Son, I'm 77 years old, and I've been getting things wrong my whole life, and I think it's time we talked about that. Not the specifics of it, but the fact of it, because the specifics of my life are mine, but the shape of the mistakes is yours too, if you're not careful." I don't know how to write that either. It's close to 4 now. The line of light on the floor has shifted, the way it does. I've been watching it move without registering that it's moving. I think about Gloria's voice, the low, husky one, the one that hummed without meaning to. I think about my father's hands. I think about Deshawn, who probably opened Dupree's this morning at 7, because he always opened at 7, and who is working under someone's car right now, or will be in a few hours, with the same kind of hands, the same smell of grease that doesn't fully leave. And I hope nobody in his life has ever made him feel that those hands are something to apologize for. I hope he has never had to sit on the edge of a bed in the dark, trying to decide what to do with a feeling that has no clean shape to it. The hard thing about being old is that the things you understand now came too late to be useful. I understand now what it would have meant to say, "Gloria, sit down. I need you to hear me." I understand what it would have meant to say, "This is what you did to me tonight, and I need you to know it." I understand that the dignity of showing up dressed and clean to that table, while real, while genuinely mine, was also a way of not being seen, a way of being present that was also a kind of hiding. I showed up in the suit, but I left the wound at home. And the wound was the thing that needed to come to the table. I think that's the truth of it, the truest thing I can say. You can show up, you can be clean, you can hold your back straight and look people in the eye and refuse to make yourself small. And all of that can be real dignity, genuinely real, and it can still be a way of not saying the thing that needs to be said. The showing up and the saying are two different things. I knew how to do the first one. My father taught me the first one. Nobody taught me the second one. I'm not sure I learned it before it was too late to use it. My coffee is cold. I noticed this time when it went. The neighborhood is very quiet right now. Early morning quiet, the specific quality of it, before anything starts. Before the buses and the garbage trucks and the distant sound of the highway beginning to fill up. I like this hour. I have made peace with being a man who likes this particular hour. I want to tell Marcus that, in the letter, Not just the Thanksgiving, not just the grease and the suit and the silence, but this too, that there's a peace available on the other side of things, even things you didn't handle right. That regret doesn't have to be the last room, that I have sat in this chair, in this quiet, and I have thought about his grandmother and my father and the garage and the smell of the work and the Wednesday night in the kitchen and all of it, and I am still here, still breathing, still thinking. That the mistakes were real, and the love was also real, and both of those things are true at the same time, without one cancelling the other out. I don't know if that's wisdom. I'm suspicious of calling anything wisdom. What it feels like is just the residue of having lived long enough, of having carried the cargo long enough that your arms have gotten used to the weight of it. My father died with things unsaid. I will die with things unsaid. That's probably the way of it for most people. The question is whether you say more than your father said, and more than his father said before him. Whether the line moves, even a little, even a few words more toward the truth than the silence that came before you. I think I've said more than he did. I think that's something. Renee would probably say I haven't said enough. She would probably be right. She usually is. The light is doing something different now. Still the same line, but the color of it has changed slightly, the way it does before the actual dawn. Not light yet, but the anticipation of it. I should try to sleep. I won't sleep, but I should try. I sat at that table 36 years ago in my good suit, and I smelled like soap, and I was clean, and I looked at Preston Holloway across the table, and I felt every year of my life in my back and my hands, and I thought, I am here, and I will not apologize for it. I still believe that was the right thing to do. I just wish I had done more with the night that came after it, with the 4 years that came after it, with the woman who was mine, and who I was not able to find my way to the center of, who hummed without knowing she was humming, who organized everything including her own grief, who said something that split me open and never knew I was split. I wish I had said, Gloria, I'm split. Right here. Come look at it. Tell me what you see. Maybe she would have looked. Maybe she wouldn't have. I'll never know that, which is its own kind of weight. The coffee cup is on the table. The light is changing. My knees are stiff, and my back is telling me I've been in this chair too long. I'm going to sit here a little while longer anyway.